Welcome to L Said What. And if you stop by this live stream and you enjoy the video, please don't forget to hit the like button. This video is about Brady v. Maryland. And I was reminded of Brady v. Maryland by the recent dismissal in the Alec Baldwin case. So, how is it that a crime that was committed in 1958 is connected to Alec Baldwin's acquittal in 2024? Well, the best place to start, of course, is at the beginning. And because I respect your time and I appreciate whoever it is that has clicked on this video, what I'm going to discuss in this video is John Leo Brady. I'm going to discuss who John Leo Brady is, the crime that he would ultimately be convicted of, and I'm going to end this video with the problem that turned into Brady v. Maryland, that over 50 years later would assist or basically be the foundation for Alec Baldwin getting a dismissal in the Rust trial. So, John Leo Brady. John Leo Brady couldn't be more opposite than Alec Baldwin. He was born in Southern Maryland, and John was a fussy baby, and he had young parents. And so his parents decided to let his his father's parents raise him. So John Brady was raised by his father's parents, his grandparents, and his aunt Celeste. And John's grandfather, John's grandfather, just like John's parents, owned a small tobacco farm. So these are poor tobacco farmers, struggling tobacco farmers. And not only is John's grandparents and his aunt Celeste tasked with raising him, but John actually, from infancy on up until his late teens, suffered from a condition called otitis media. And this it was horrible for anybody, especially a child, especially a school-aged child, because the condition causes a thick, foul-smelling pus to ooze out of the ears. So John was teased by children in school and given the nickname stink ears. So John would drop out of school in 8th grade happily, and he began working at that time on his uncle's farm full time. When John was 19, he joined the Air Force. And surprisingly, John Brady was an MP. He was a military policeman, and he served on bases in Washington State and in Greenland. Other than Maryland, before John is arrested, Washington is the only other state that John had ever been to. And this would prove significant. This would prove significant. The information that I'm getting, by the way, can be found in the description. And this information in particular comes from the Marshall Project. So, 1951, John is 19 years young and he joins the Air Force. And over the next 4 years, the horrible condition that caused the foul smelling pus, the otitis media, well, that ceased over the next 4 years. And John, he married, he divorced, he got his GED. Remember, John dropped out of school in the 8th grade. He got his GED, And eventually, John moved back home to Maryland. Well, before John left the Air Force, John became a Castro sympathizer. And these are within the years circa 1952 to 1956. And John Brady, while he was in the Air Force, he met Cubans who supported Castro's revolution. And John actually helped these people move small shipments of guns that were supposed to reach Castro. So John was more than a sympathizer to Fidel Castro. While in the United States Air Force, John actively supported Castro's movement. So, March 1958, John is back home. He's back in Southern Maryland. And John is 28 years old by this time. And he's making $1.50 an hour. He works at a local tobacco packing company. And if you can't tell, tobacco farms literally could be seen off the side of the road in Southern Maryland. Huge, huge, huge portion of that state's revenue, tobacco farming. So while John is back in Southern Maryland and he's back at his aunt's house, he meets really good friends of his aunt around March 1958. He meets Donald Boblet and his sister, Nancy. Now, Nancy is 19. She's blonde. She's described by a friend as a dumb, pretty blonde. And Nancy's married, but Nancy makes it pretty clear that she's independent. She does what she wants. She is married to Slim McGowan, and Nancy and Slim live with Nancy's parents. And Nancy and Slim don't really talk to each other much. And Nancy and Donald become Nancy and Donald, who is Nancy's brother, become really good friends, become really good friends with John Brady. Now, Donald is around this time 25 years old. He's described as gawky, barely literate, and lonely. So ask yourself by the end of this story if you think that Donald was influenced by John Brady. If you can decide who did what. So by June of 1958, John is in love with Nancy, and Nancy is pregnant. John is making $1.50 an hour. He's broke. He had just managed to buy this old Ford, a 1947 maroon Ford, and he was currently behind on his bills. And here it is, Nancy's pregnant. And so this is June 1958. So John wastes no time. He meets Nancy in March. Nancy's pregnant by June. John says he's in love. But he wanted to show Nancy how dedicated he was to her. And John is described as impulsive. John Brady is described as a dreamer. And so, what John does is to show his dedication to Nancy. He wrote Nancy a post dated check. And this check he wrote to her June 23rd. And he post dated it for July 6th. And he made the check out for $35,000. Why $35,000? Well, John just pulled the number out of thin air. So there it is. John Brady has post dated this check to his pregnant love. And it's June 23rd. It's a Sunday. And the next day, Nancy is supposedly going to visit relatives in New York, and she's going to be there. She's going to visit family for 2 weeks. Well, John tells her, don't cash the check for 2 weeks, right? It's post dated. And so, John, over the next few days, John Brady is trying to figure out He's trying to figure out how to come up with this money. And $35,000 is a lot of money now, and it was even more money in 1958. So John, he comes up with a plan. John, he needs Donald's help for this plan. John decides that the only way that he can get this $35,000, that the only way that money can be in the bank by the time Nancy goes to cash it is to rob a bank. And John gets with Nancy's brother Donald, and together they decide we're going to avoid the big cities. And they chose Stevensville, Maryland, which is about 30 miles from Chesapeake Bay and from Chesapeake Bay Bridge. And they chose Stevensville, Maryland to rob a bank because, well, they decided that the larger cities had too much security, too many police, too many security guards. So Stevensville, Maryland, it is. And the problem is, according to Brady, they needed a car. His old 1947, what was it, a Ford? He says it's definitely not going to make it. It's definitely not going to make it if we're in a chase. So we need a car. And when John was a kid, there was a man by the name of William Brooks, and William Brooks worked as a farmhand on John's grandfather's tobacco farm. And William Brooks had this good job currently. He was working in a nearby town at a plastics factory. He was working the night shift, and it was about 20 miles from Baltimore. And John had stopped by to see William Brooks, one day. And William Brooks had just bought a brand new blue two-toned Fairlane. And according to prosecutors, Brady Brady wanted that car. He wanted that brand new Fairlane. Well, William Brooks, he lived out in a little shack in the woods, according to the Marshall Project, and he was still really good friends with John Brady and his family. In fact, just recently, Brooks had a surgery, and he had stayed at Aunt Celeste's house. Aunt Celeste, who helped to raise John. So Brooks has a brand new car, and John Brady and Donald decide that they need a dependable car to pull off this bank robbery. And the plan is, because Brooks lives out in the woods, there's this little dirt road that leads to the highway that William Brooks has to take to leave his house to go to work and to go back home. And so Brady and Donald, Nancy's brother, decide to lay a log across this little dirt road. And that means that Brooks is going to have to stop if he wants to continue traveling, right? He's going to have to stop to move this log. So they wait. Brooks works the late shift, and Donald and John Brady lay in wait. And John Brady says, "It has to be you, Donald. It has to be you, Donald," because William Brooks had known John Brady for the majority of his life. So Donald has a double barrel shotgun. William Brooks stops the Fairlane. He gets out of the car. He goes to move the log. And that's when Donald runs up, and he basically commandeers the car eventually, but he runs up to Brooks, and he shoves Brooks into the back seat of the car. And by this time, he's shoving Brooks into the back seat of the car, and that's when Brady comes out and helps to get Brooks into the back seat of the car. And Donald and the farmhand the who knows Brady, who's being carjacked pretty much at this point, William Brooks. William Brooks is pleading over and over and over, please don't kill me. Please don't kill me. Well, because according to Donald Boblet, Brooks wouldn't shut up. He hit Brooks in the head with a double barrel shotgun. Brooks is knocked out or close to being knocked out. And so they can easily get him on into the back of the car and they pull off. And this plan is not well thought out because on the fly, John Brady is trying to think of what to do with Brooks. John Brady maintains he does not want William Brooks dead. He does not want him hurt. And Brady decides, let's take him to a heavily wooded area and we'll leave him there. And then they would go and use the fair lane to rob the bank in Chester in Stevensville. In Stevensville. So Donald Boblick says, no, no. He says, we gotta kill him. He's seen me. We gotta kill him. And Brady says to Donald, put that GD gun away. Somebody might hear a shot. And according to John Brady, over and over and over, he is telling Donald Boblick he does not want William Brooks hurt. He only wants the fair lane. He doesn't want Brooks hurt. Because according to Brady, Brooks was good to him when he was a kid. So right around the time that they're parking near the trees, remember they're gonna leave Brooks in this wooded area. Brooks starts to come to. He's woozy, and they start to walk Brooks into the woods, and he's wobbly, and you can tell he's dazed and confused because he has his lunch pail with him, like he's going to work. And the three men stop in a clearing, and according to Brady, which is convenient, he walked away a little bit and he turned his back. And when he turned back around, David Donald Boblick had taken off his red plaid shirt and had twisted the sleeves up really tight. And he was strangling Brooks to death. Brooks was 53 years old. He's described as having been a frail man and who could not have fought back against 25-year-old Donald Boblick. And John Brady says that he runs toward Brooks. He runs toward Brooks and he runs toward Donald Boblick to pull Boblick away from Brooks, but that it was too late, that William Brooks was dead. And Brady said that he was staring at Brooks's body and he said, he's dead. He said he's dead. And Donald responded, let's get out of here, John. And so before they left that clearing, John Leo Brady and Donald Boblick carried William Brooks's body deeper into the woods. And curiously, John Brady placed branches over Brooks's face and over his head. And as they're going back to the car, to the fair lane, Brady, one of them picked up his lunchbox, Brooks's lunchbox, and they just threw it as far as they could into the woods. Now, Brady insists that a murder was not ever planned. And by dawn, John Brady says to Donald Boblick about the bank robbery, quote, I just can't do it. Done enough, unquote. Before they left William Brooks in that wooded area dead, strangled to death, John Brady and Donald Boblick went in Brooks's wallet and they robbed him. of $255.30, down to taking the change. Do you believe John Brady when he says, I didn't want him hurt? Because I think it's cold to rob the man after he's been strangled to death, down to the last 30 cents in his wallet. So Brady says he doesn't have it in him to rob the bank, that he's done enough. And he tells Donald, let's go to Washington. And remember, Washington is the only other place that John Brady had ever lived besides Southern Maryland. And they made it to Lynchburg, Virginia, about 200 miles. And by that time, Donald Boblick, he just wants to go home. He just wants to go home. He wants to go back to Southern Maryland. And John Brady doesn't have it in him to fight him. So Donald Boblick heads back to Southern Maryland. And it was Friday night when Brady and Donald Boblick ambushed William Brooks to take his car. They reached Westburg, Virginia, I believe on Saturday. And so here it is, Sunday. And Donald Boblick, he's gone back home. And to get home, what they did in Lynchburg, Virginia, was they went to the Trailways bus station. And they caught a bus. And they caught a bus back home. And so Sunday, here it is, Brady, he drops by, he goes to his Aunt Celeste's house. And Brady and Boblick figured that it would take 2 or 3 days. They had 2 or 3 days, they figured, before William Brooks would be reported missing. And so, they're back in Southern Maryland. It's Sunday. William Brooks was murdered late Friday night. They catch the bus Saturday. They get to Lynchburg, Virginia Saturday, decide they're just going to go home. Sunday, they're back in Maryland. And John Brady's aunt tells him that a couple of cops came by asking about him. You see, William Brooks's landlord was also his co-worker at the plastics factory. So when William Brooks didn't show up to work Saturday afternoon at 4 p.m., well, the landlord reported him missing. And the landlord told the police that I last saw William Brooks with John Brady. Maybe they're together. So it's Sunday. And like I said, Brady's aunt has just told him that a couple of cops came by looking for you. And Brady, Brady, he must have been about to pee his pants. I'm sure he thought that he was safe at least for another day before anybody even noticed that Brooks was missing. Even though Brooks lived out in this little shack in the woods, he had friends. He had a landlord. He had a job that he went to every day. He just bought a brand new car 2 weeks before. Well, Brady looks at his aunt, hands her his keys, points outside to his car, and says, I'm leaving the country. Now, guess where John Brady decides to go? John Brady decides he's going to go to Cuba and he's going to join the revolution. He's going to go and he's going to fight with the rebels. And he's going to He's going to join Castro's army. So John booked a flight to Havana with his share of the money out of William Brooks's wallet. So not only did Brady orchestrate carjacking William Brooks, murdering William Brooks ultimately a result of the carjacking, robbing William Brooks of every cent in his wallet. He used William Brooks's money to go on the run. So Sunday, Aunt says, couple of cops come looking for you. John Brady is in Havana Monday by noon. Before noon, he's in Havana. So after he gets sleep, he's wandering around Havana trying to figure out how to hook up with some of Castro's guys. How does he meet them? How does he hook up with them? How does he get word to Castro's men that he wants to join the revolution? Well, that didn't last long. That's Monday. And around this time, while John is wandering around Havana and Donald is in Southern Maryland at home, Nancy decides, I'm not waiting 2 weeks to cash this check. I'm not. It's been Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. She decides, I'm going to go and try and cash this check. Brady had no money in his account, $0. Nancy was embarrassed. She was humiliated because the teller actually laughed at her. So there's pregnant Nancy. She doesn't know where John is. I imagine Donald's not talking very much. And that check didn't just bounce. The teller laughed at her. So meanwhile, while wandering around Havana trying to hook up with Castro's guys, John Brady starts to miss Nancy. I mean, he was in love with her after all, and she is pregnant at the time. And John wants to reunite with Nancy. And he goes into a period of what I call denial. And John concocts this story. He decides, right, that he'll just, tell the cops that Donald hit William Brooks over the head, took his car, left him on side of the road, and that he and Donald don't have any idea where William Brooks is. And John Brady figured that'll cover me, that'll cover Donald. So Wednesday, John Brady goes to the American embassy in Cuba, and he decides to turn himself in, telling this story. John Brady had decided that all he was guilty of was stealing William Brooks's brand new blue two-tone Fairlane. That was it. That's all he had done. Well, while he's talking to the legal counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Cuba, he drops the name Donald. He drops Donald's name. And so, unbeknownst to John, they're going to contact police in Southern Maryland, and 3 cops are going to show up to go get Donald the next day. Well, just hours. That was it. Hours after telling his story at the embassy, at the U.S. Embassy in Cuba, John Brady is in Miami. Cuba couldn't get rid of him fast enough, in my opinion. And so he tells the FBI this story. And the next day, Wednesday, John is formally charged with car theft and transporting transporting a stolen vehicle across state lines. And John Brady is thinking, I don't have a criminal record. Surely he was thinking about how he was a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. And maybe I'll get probation or a light sentence. I don't have any priors, he's thinking. He's in complete denial. Or in his mind, he's not responsible for the murder of William Brooks. Hi, Emmeline. Thanks for joining me. Oh, good morning. You must be in the UK. I'm discussing American jurisprudence, and I'm going the long roundabout way of telling how the Brady rule, which stems from a case in 1958, is why Alec Baldwin's case was dismissed. So back to John Brady. John Brady's in Miami. It's Wednesday. He gets arraigned. Car theft, transporting across interstate lines. Maybe I'll just get probation. I don't have any criminal record. That's Wednesday. Little did John Brady know that 3 policemen had gone to Donald's house and taken Donald down to the station. And the police barely said anything to Donald before Donald Bowlett just starts to tell it all. And Bowlett says, hold on. I'm sorry, Donald Boblet. I'm calling the man Bowlett. Donald Boblet. And Boblet pretty much says, well, you're going to find out anyway. I may as well tell you. He says, it was all John Brady. It was his plan. He did everything. Boblet didn't even know William Brooks's name. Didn't even know the man's name. And so he said, Brady did it. Brady did it. It wasn't me. Quote, I didn't do nothing. It was all his idea and he done it all. Now, Donald Boblet does make a point. It was Brady who needed money. It was Brady who knew William Brooks. Even at this time, that Donald Boblet is confessing to police. He doesn't even know William Brooks' name. But then on the other hand, it makes sense that John Brady would not have wanted William Brooks to see his face. So it doesn't matter. We now have something called the law of parties, but it's going to matter. So Thursday, almost 1 week after the carjacking, the robbery, and the murder, the FBI confronts John Brady with Donald Boblet's story. And they tell John Brady, according to Boblet, this was your plan, that this was your idea, and that you murdered William Brooks. And Brady said, now, wait a minute. I don't believe that Donald Boblet would say such a thing. He refused to believe that Donald Boblet had talked to police because, see, John Brady didn't even know that Donald Boblet was in police custody the day before. So the FBI begins to tell more details of what Donald Boblet told them. And they began to point out where Boblet's story and John Brady's story matched. And finally convinced, Brady said, okay, the first story I told to protect Donald. I would argue that he told it to protect both of them. But he said, Donald murdered Brooks before I could stop him. He said, I turned my back. He said, and by the time I turned around, he had his shirt off and he had strangled William Brooks to death before I could stop him. Well, as you can see, July 3rd, 1958, the Evening Sun, two charged in Anne Arundel murder, one held in Florida. Remember, at this time, John Brady is in Miami. So when Donald Boblet confessed, he did not stop confessing. And Boblet gave a total of 5 confessions. And this is the critical point. In Boblet's first 4 confessions, he put everything on John Brady. John Brady came up with the plan. John Brady stole the vehicle. John Brady strangled William Brooks to death. That's the first 4 out of 5 confessions. Once Donald Boblet found out that William Brady had been transported back to Maryland and that he was no longer in FBI custody in Maryland, Donald Boblet gave a 5th confession. And in the 5th confession, Boblet admitted to being the one to hitting Brooks over the head with a shotgun and taking off his red plaid shirt and strangling William Brooks to death. So, John Brady and Donald Boblet, Nancy's brother, were both charged with first-degree felony murder during the course of a robbery, and the government was seeking the death penalty by way of the gas chamber. Now, Brady had already confessed to stealing the car to rob a bank. He'd already confessed to helping to drag William Brooks's body deeper into the woods. He's already confessed to being the connection between Donald Boblet and his charge partner and William Brooks, the victim. So what is his defense? Well, John Brady had decided that his defense would be asking the court for mercy to not sentence him to death because he did not actually physically kill William Brooks. If you were on the jury and you found John Brady guilty of felony murder, would it matter to you that Donald Boblet confessed that he actually committed the act of murder and that confession matches John Brady's confession? Well, what happened? How is it that the kid who grew up on a tobacco farm raised by his grandparents, struggling, poor, Castro Castro sympathizer, 28 years old, in love, baby on the way, making $1.50 an hour. How does his name go down in American jurisprudence history? I'll tell you how. Brady demanded a jury trial, and his defense attorney requested from the government every statement made by Donald Boblet. 5 confessions. The government handed over to the defense The first four confessions where Donald Boblet said, I ain't do nothing. John Brady did everything. The fifth confession, where Boblet's story actually matches John Brady, that he is the one who physically did all of the damage to William Brooks, the victim, hit him over the head with a shotgun, strangled him to death with his own shirt. The fifth confession, the government decided we're not going to give that to the defense because, see, that would hurt our case. You heard me right. We live in an America where that's called exculpatory evidence, evidence that tends to lean toward the defendant telling the truth. So that is where I'm going to end this. And if you are so inclined, if the spirit moves you, donate to the Marshall Project. They do good work. And I'm going to quote the Marshall Project. The state holding back, the government, holding back that fifth confession because it would hurt their case, is the biggest piece of luck Brady ever got, unquote. So John Brady is facing the gas chamber, and the one confession from his charge partner that matches his confession that states he did not physically harm William Brooks at all, much less murder him, the government has decided not to turn that confession over. But see, I've worked wrongful convictions, and it can take years to find out that something like that fifth confession even exists. So join me tomorrow for part two, and I'm going to finish connecting the dots as to how John Brady committing a crime in 1958 led to Alec Baldwin's manslaughter trial being dismissed in 2024. 2024. Right. So don't forget, like this video and keep your eye out for part two. From Brady to Baldwin. Thanks for joining me.